Whether you like them or whether you loathe them, you've got to have a begrudging respect for how far Sony's cameras have come in recent years, from the original A7 through to right now with the A7R3 and the Sony A9. Now, you are always going to have people argue till they're blue in the face, is the Sony A9 really as good at focusing as the 1DX Mark II or the D5? Is the Sony A7R3 really a good all-round camera, better than a 5D Mark IV or a D850? But there is one thing you cannot dispute. The A7S is the king of video. So let's talk about the prospect of a Sony A7S3. This is an interesting one because Sony like to push boundaries. They've recently come out with this new design that mounts the processor basically onto the back of the sensor, which allows for a much faster data read off the sensor. So if you look at the A7R2, that shoots 42 megapixels at 5 frames a second. The A7R3 uses that same 42 megapixel sensor, but with this new processing unit can shoot at 10 frames a second. The Sony A9 can shoot 24 megapixels at 20 frames a second, which begs the question, are they going to do an A7S3 and what are we going to see from it? Now, the A7S and A7S2 both only have 12 megapixel sensors, which doesn't make them very good for shooting stills, but does make them ideal for video work and low light performance. So if Sony produce an A7S3, it's probably going to use the same sort of processing setup as the A7R3 and A9. So they're going to be able to shift a massive amount of data off a very low resolution sensor. So they're going to likely focus all that processing power towards video performance. They're not really going to bother increasing the shooting speed because it's not primarily a stills camera. So what are they going to do in terms of video? Currently the A7S2 can shoot 4K video at 30 frames a second. So probably they'll be able to shoot 4K at 60 frames a second. But the Mark II can also handle 1080 at 120 frames a second. So would Sony dare try and do 1080 at 240 frames a second on a full frame sensor? Or could they potentially try even crazier and go with a 6K using a 24 megapixel sensor? But what do you guys think? Do you reckon an A7S3 is on the cards? What do you reckon Sony are going to do with it, and would you buy one if they did? Leave your comment down below, let me know what you think, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.